You're listening to Funny Peculiar with Jeff Downs.
Welcome to Funny Peculiar. This week I have the amazing John Cooper, character comedian. John's done stand-up, he's done illustrations, he's a big comic book illustrator as well. But today I wanted to concentrate on character comedy and Danny Pensive, his character. So we find out about that. John's Instagram account is johncooper_UK. That's the same as his Twitter account. And you can find him on Facebook as well, and currently on Facebook it's the John Cooper, because he has a show coming up called Confessions of a WordPress Fanatic. So click, find John, add him, download this particular episode. It's a great one. So without further ado, please welcome Mr. John Cooper. So, welcome to another episode of Funny Peculiar. And this week I have my very first character comedian, John Cooper. Hello, John.
Hello. Hi, Jeff. How are you?
Not too bad. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks for having us on.
You're very welcome. And we're just talking now, and we're in the Castle Hotel in Manchester, Oldham Street, which is just down from the Frog and Bucket, which is one of the main comedy venues in Manchester.
Yes,
so,
it is.
And you've performed there quite a few times.
Yes, other comedy clubs are available.
That's very sensible. They are indeed. But Frog and Bucket is quite one of those famous ones for Manchester, isn't it?
Yes, the Frog and Bucket is a very well-established Manchester venue. Like, there's the main two are the Frog and Bucket and the Comedy Store as well. I think that Comedy Store's been around. I don't know if it's been around longer or not, but yeah, the Comedy Store is the other one.
And you've got, because Manchester's always had those are the main two, but it's always had pockets of other clubs. Because I saw you years ago when I first started. I came up to Manchester, and there was on Oxford Street. There was a gig in by the dance house, just from the dance house.
Was that one of the Excess Malarkeys, or was that one of the Comedy Balloons?
I think it was an Excess Malarkey that might have been. And back then you were, and we're going to talk about character comedy today, but you also do improv, and you do other workshops, and we'll chat about that.
Cool.
But you started in stand-up, is that right?
Yes, very, very straight stand. Well, not straight stand-up. It was always quirky stand-up that I was doing. I started doing stand-up in Newcastle in North East in maybe 2009.
Oh, right, okay.
2000, so a long time ago.
Yeah.
And it was a friend of mine who was in an Amateur Dramatic Society, and we're both we're doing Henry V, and I had the minor part in it, and he's like, "Oh, I'm going to the comedy club for the workshop."
And which part did you have? Can you remember?
I was a French soldier. I had to recite like 3 pages of Shakespearean text in French.
Right. And did you get the French accent, or was it a bit of a?
Oh no, I can't remember it now, but it was phonetically learned. I kind of barely knew what it was I was saying. And
just be careful, especially when I sometimes say to an American, "Are you American?" They're Canadian. I've got to, you're from Sunderland, and and for people listening that won't know the difference, what's the difference between someone from Sunderland, which is a Mackem, and then a Geordie is New? Is that right?
There's very, very little geographically to tell the difference between the two, but I'm sure anyone who was into football will tell you different. But they're just two towns that are near each other, and people have similar accents.
Right, okay. And Mackem, where does that come from?
Mackem is the shipbuilding terminology from way back when we built ships and would make the ships and take the ships. And in the like accent, it's would mack them and would tack them.
Right.
We'll mack the ships and then we'll tack the ships to where they need to be. So that's where Mackem comes from.
Okay.
So that's the term.
And Geordie is just.
There are many variations of Geordie. One of them I do in my set is Danny Pensive. There's one kind of heckle put down that I've got that I always look forward to when someone heckles us for being a Maggem, and I'll put them down because I know why Mackems are Maggems, but ask the Geordie why they're called a Geordie. And there's various tenuous theories about why they're called Geordies, and I wouldn't prescribe to any particular one. So I'm just a Maggem, so I know where my people come from. I couldn't possibly answer on behalf of the Geordies, and if I would, I would potentially rile them up, so I'll not.
No, fair enough. We'll disclaimer straight away. So you did Henry V, so you're in the theatre, and mate said, come to
a stand-up comedy workshop at the Hyena Comedy Cafe in Newcastle, and that's where I kind of learned how to get good.
Yes.
over time.
And
it took quite a while to. It took quite a while for me to bed in. I was like bad for a long time. I'll openly admit that kind of like I was not a very funny person for a long time. But I loved it. I enjoyed it. I loved the immediate feedback of whether you're doing well or not. So I just stuck at it. And then there was like one particular time I just locked myself in a room for days and days and days, wrote stuff. And then I think the breakout gig was I came and did this gig at the Chillingham Road in Newcastle, and Anvil Springsteen was one of the faces on that circuit, and he didn't really pay me any attention much because obviously he was an established paid actor at that point, and I was just this kind of trying open spot. But there was one, I remember him just taking us off stage one time and just saying, that was brilliant, I really enjoyed that, you've really put the work in, you put the effort in, and you know, just to have someone notice at that stage and just go, you have put the work in, I have observed you be shit, and I have observed you put the work in, and I thought that was great. And that was my, I mean, I was sold on the second gig in terms of stand-up. The second gig was the one where I got a laugh, and it's kind of like, oh, I'm going to do this forever.
And was that the fuel that kept you going? Because you said in some of them where you just don't get anything.
I had been a creative before that, in waving his fingers in air quotes. I wrote and drew comics as an illustrator, and I did that in the 90s, and I was getting reviewed in like the independent comics press. So I was used to writing stuff and then illustrating it, and then getting it printed in various photocopies and printing machines, and then distributing it via the small press thing, and then getting lots of nice feedback going, oh, we really like this, it's quite funny, it's quite interesting, this independent comic that you're writing.
And what was that? What was the name of that?
It was really eclectic. It was called Magic Lamp Boy, and it was a very, very eclectic kind of, it was, you know, basically my childhood was brought up on The Prisoner and Doctor Who and all that kind of thing, so it was basically about this kind of particularly odd character who you could just pick up and dump in any situation, and he would kind of fuel the plot, just like the way Doctor Who is like, regardless of the character, you can write a story about anything you want, and you've got a character that does it. And
can anybody see it? Have you got a website?
Yes.
Let's give a shout out now.
If you go on the Rocket Steps website and go into the archive, rocketsteps.co.uk, everything I do is on there. And there is an archive page which has all my old comic stuff PDF'd.
I'll list this all in the bio on iTunes.
From way back. And if you are so inclined, but that was getting back to the point. It's kind of like that took forever to get the gratification. Of that. It's kind of like you write it, then you pencil it, then you draw it, then you print it, then you send it, and then you get a letter back saying, oh, we like this. And then stand-up comedy is like, you write the joke, you get on stage, you tell it, and people will tell you if it's funny or not. It's kind of like, that level of immediate gratification was just kind of like, that's brilliant. It's kind of like clear as day whether or not you're doing it right or wrong, because you've got an audience in the room with you there and then. It's not like writing a novel where it's kind of like, is this good? Is this good? I don't know. Is it good? Am I going mad? Am I going nuts? It's kind of like, so
it was instant, basically.
That was what got me hooked on comedy, and even then it was kind of like my early days of stand-up were quite eclectic.
And can you remember the material you were doing, or it was just?
Oh God, I came on stage in a blue paisley shirt and stood on stage and said, I try very hard in polite society not to come across as a dangerous freak, or something like that. And then I had all these kind of stories that were kind of like, where's it going? I remember like early doors, I got a Chorl review that was reasonably polite, where they just said it was kind of original and unpredictable, and they also said it was kind of like some of it we didn't get and some of it blah blah blah.
How did that feel, your first review?
It was pleasant. I mean, they weren't like, they weren't saying he's going to set the world on fire, which I haven't. But to my mind, originality and unpredictability are still things that I hang on to. It's not about all the people all the time, it's about some of the people some of the time, taken to the nth degree.
And so this is in Sunderland, so you go around the North East and then you build up the stand-up, and at that point you decide to come to Manchester.
I came to Manchester, I did a few gigs in Leeds, I was still gigging as myself by that point. There was no Danny Pensive as yet. I gigged myself for quite a while, going to Leeds, going to Manchester, came down and did the Manchester King Gong at the Comedy Store. Lasted
And for people that don't listen to the King, that's the sort of tryout night, isn't it? Where you basically, everybody for free gets up, and if you who gongs you off? Was it the MC or is the audience?
It's designed for the audience. I mean, like traditionally now, a tryout night is where the promoter comes and watches you and you do an open spot. A gong show is much more, I think, geared towards the audience, and it's not. It's just like you've got to be funny and you've got to be solidly funny for 5 minutes, and if you're not, then 3 people have cards and they can hold the cards in the air, and if the 3 cards go in the air, then the person who's the gong meister hits the gong and you're off. So it can be quite brutal.
Yeah,
you know, I've seen people last like 10 seconds.
Right.
like just for the audience entertainment. It's quite gladiatorial in its mentality. I went there once, died on my arse, came away. And this was like, 2.5 hours down the road to
it's a long way to go. To then
but that's where you kind of like, that those trips in the car on the way there and back. That is literally, you can feel...
That was the early excitement.
Yeah, that was the impetus building and the kind of like horror driving back, going, kind of, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? Like 12 o'clock at night on the M1. Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? I want it. Why am I doing this? I want it. It's kind of like, it's just a cyclical argument with your inner torment. And then literally went back consecutively for 3 months and was Gongmeister for 3 months. Like bang, 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 1 or 3 months on the track.
You got 3 months, right?
Yeah, and I don't think you could do that now based on the amount of acts there are and the way things are, and just the fact that the industry is different. But there was, because when I started out, there wasn't this kind of wealth of acts that you have now.
Yeah.
It was, I could do that, and I did do that. It's kind of like, I even won the Gong's show at the Leeds Comedy Store, which isn't even there now.
Yeah.
And that wins you a proper tryout on a Friday night on the big stage.
Yeah, so a lot of the clubs then, so you get elevated. So so the Gong show would be on a Monday or Tuesday, something like early in the week. Yeah. And the main nights for comedy at a proper prestigious store will be a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, something like that.
Yeah, that's.
And so you get a slot on a Friday. And how did that? Do you remember your first sort of proper slot?
Just as brutal as that first Gong show. It's kind of like I remember going on the big stage for the first time. It was funny because the night I was on at the Comedy Store, a friend of mine, Seymour Mace, was also on at the Comedy Store. And he was like, a few years ahead of me and my other contemporaries, and I admired him and still do a tremendous amount. He's a wonderfully creative brain, and he was on that night as well, and I was the open spot. So to see him go out and see how he did, but I wanted to watch him, but I couldn't because it's kind of, I was so wrapped up in my own head, if I remember now. But like that stage is a big, long, wide room, and I literally went out to play. Because I had no stagecraft. It's kind of like, I think you pick the stagecraft up later on. Yeah. It's kind of, I can work that stage now comfortably. Yeah. In fact, I did the bloody kids show there a few weeks ago, and it was beautiful and awesome. And it's kind of like...
The stagecraft, for people, again, not as in, it's like the way you present yourself on stage, holding the mic.
Making use of the room and the size of the stage and where it is and what you want to get out of it. Because usually if I'm performing, I'll stand stock still as Danny P, and regardless of the size of the room, I'll try and draw the focus in, as opposed to move around. It's like the opposite of trying to fill the space.
Sure.
But I was doing a kids show, and it's kind of, can't do a kids show standing still. So it's kind of, you literally have to, and it's a wide room, as opposed to a long room. And I was only used to long rooms, so I literally stood there and played to this wall, and it's like, it's like the ball boy at a tennis match. It's kind of like the people are to the side of you, not in front of you. There's nothing in front of you. It's kind of, they're all to the side. You're going to kind of do it like tennis, play to one side, play to the other side, play to one side. And I didn't have the stagecraft or the confidence at that point to be able to work that room. That came much later on. Kind of, did the Jedi-like Zen skill of feeling a room. It's something that comes over time, I think.
It is. It's a very hard. And if you're not used to it, and like when I started, it's a real difficult thing to get used to, and get your head around. Yeah. And so you're progressing now at this level. And when does Danny Pensive come along? When do you?
Danny Pensive comes along in late 2006, 2007. At a point where I've got an agent, I'm getting paid work, I'm doing alright, I've got a bit cocky, And if anything, I've lost my way a bit. I did lose my way and got a bit kind of egotistical because I thought I was the best thing since sliced bread, and obviously I wasn't.
But you have to. But we all
But you've got to pass through
yourself
the
up because so you say you lost your way a bit. Do you think you were still gigging then?
Oh, I was very much gigging. I was gigging loads. But I think what the switch that flipped in my head was one of, I'm getting paid for this now, so it's not fun, it's work.
Yeah.
And I think, that's an easy trap for anyone to fall into. So the key thing that I was trying to do was kind of make myself more accessible when
What did it feel like when you got your first paid gig in the money in the hand? Because that must have been quite a...
That was good. That was a really good day. I remember that. It was crew. And I got a decent whack to open. And it's funny because fees haven't really gone up in the goddamn how many years I've been doing it. The fees haven't really moved that much.
Yeah.
But
did it feel like validation?
Yeah, it did. And it's kind of like, I think it took, because I was on the my apprenticeship was a long one. I think by the time I got paid, it didn't feel like a chancer. I felt like I'd put me time in.
Yeah,
so to speak.
But you did.
Yeah, because it didn't just happen overnight. It was something that took a while to kind of to hit before someone was willing to give us money for a gig. But then again, I think equally when I got signed to the Gag Reflex agency as it was starting up, that was a wonderful sense of validation. But that just fed my ego like nobody's business. To come wittering on. To come back to answer your question, Danny Pensive came about in kind of 2007 as I was trying to rediscover why I got into stand up in the first place.
Yeah.
Because I was quite quirky and quite odd when I started, and I'd become quite confident and relaxed and comfortable. And I'd kind of I'm like a late bloomer in my early 30s, I know who I am, I've arrived, I've been doing this thing where I share my thoughts on stage, and was very comfortable in my own skin at that point. And it was almost like, I haven't got anything really odd to talk about anymore as me, so it's kind of like, okay, so I was almost using a character to tap into a earlier version of myself, so to speak, so kind of dip into not my own childhood, but a version thereof.
Danny's and I'll put some links on the Facebook page because there'll be clips. Yeah. So Danny's, when I first saw him, so he was a very quiet, I suppose, version of himself. He wore a duffel coat, didn't he? As I remember it.
Yeah.
And it was very sort of motionless in the mid. Basically, he just stood there, and it's just these. Trains of thought of what's going about. Very E.L. Wisty, the Peter Cooks type thing.
Kind of, a bit of that, bit of Vic and Bob in there. Yeah. Almost. A bit of Spike Milligan, because he was one of my heroes. Just kind of how far can I take people on a... World building, I think, was a thing I was a fan of, kind of And
had you seen other character comedians and went, that's for me, or I could do that, or was it just something that came from inside you?
I think it probably been there a while, because it's kind of it was a version of the act that I started with, but it was kind of more instead of a wayward version, it was a more applied version of that. So I think I knew what I wanted, but the writing became really hard to find. That writing is really hard, and I haven't written any good. I haven't really written stuff in a very long time, because I do so much improv these days that I generally, all my new stuff is kind of improvised on the fly. Yeah. And actual writing is such an incredibly hard process to nail stuff down. I've done a little bit, but hey, that's the job.
But Danny went you had a good run with Danny. I mean, you're still doing that again.
I still do Danny.
You were doing support tours for... I remember seeing you...
I'm still very active as Danny. I'm still doing a lot as Danny, I did 3 support tours for One Man Star Wars.
You've done Edinburgh shows.
I've done a couple of Edinburgh shows.
Which I drove you to in Liverpool. from Channel X, Matt Tiller.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
To about 4 people, which was typical of Edinburgh previews. With people that don't know, with Edinburgh, obviously massive festival every year in August, but all the comedians go and try out their shows before they go up there, and these are known as Edinburgh previews.
Yes.
Normally, it will be a room with literally 4 people and a barman or whoever watching.
Yeah.
And this was in Lark Lane, Liverpool. I remember this, but this was, and I think this is the first time I've seen your drawings used, because I think in that first show you used bits of your animation.
I did, yeah. I used kind of animation illustration, and that's kind of stuff I've always wanted to go back to. But there's always a thing where I'm kind of going, low tech is better than high tech in terms of what can go wrong. But I do want to do a technology based show again. Which has got a bit more interaction to it, but back then it was kind of like, and not unlike stuff that I had seen Vic Reeves do, because Vic Reeves was an illustrator as well, and I was a big fan of Vic and Bob. And
yes, they do. Or Vic illustrates a lot, doesn't he? And is that where you kind of got the.
Well, I'd always kind of done illustration before, but it's kind of like it was rare that I would kind of like. It's almost like that had been a separate stream. I'd never really included it that much in.
Was there a Viz element there coming from the northeast, which is that got you, or was it
not really. It's kind of like all my illustration tends to be a bit more straightforward than that.
And just to say, Viz is a Newcastle sort of underground cult comic, which then grew.
Yeah, I mean, Viz is massive in the northeast. And I do know a couple of guys who do work in comedy who are part of Viz. I mean, one of them, Simon Donald, isn't that active anymore, but Alex Collier, who's a friend of mine, is very still active, and he's a really good case study for someone who's not necessarily a stand-up, but is funny, creative and successful in that sphere. It's kind of like he's drawing Viz 1 minute and then doing Danger Mouse the next, which is kind of like beautiful to see. He's done some Mr. Bean as well. I've got nothing but admiration for Alex.
Well, there's now a animation festival in Kendal each year, and I was up there and I saw 2 of the Viz animators do live drawing.
Wow, that's awesome.
And that's great. I think now with technology, because you can now draw straight onto flat screen, can't you? Do you do that, or are you traditional?
I do digital tablet based stuff.
Right, okay. Do you prefer that, or you prefer the pen and paper?
Whatever I'm doing at the time, you know. If I'm down to the pub and I'm having a few pints and I want to do some sketching, then probably paper's a better way to go than a grand's worth of graphics tablet.
Because you don't want to get it.
It's entirely to do with what's the agenda.
And so Danny was going on that, and then you got into Comedy Sportz. Now I do remember now. How did you get involved with this improv group?
That literally happened as I.
And if you want to take a swig of cider here,
I will.
Feel free. Because
take a swig.
I'm giving you all these questions, and I'm like, my technique's terrible here because it's like
Comedy Sportz. I joined that in same thing, 2006, 2007, and I had done a little bit of improv before that in Newcastle because I was a member of a sketch club called Soup. Which was a bunch of guys. Jason Cook was part of it, Seymour Mace was part of it, Dan Nightingale was part of it, a host of people were part of it, and I was the least writery of all of them. So while Jason was prolifically writing like hour-long fucking shows every month, I did a thing called the employment opportunity, where I'd basically written some questions and then would get somebody up the stage and kind of do an interview. So it's kind of like there'd be a chef or a gangster or a vicar, and it's kind of like, and I'd just be a character and interview that person and just kind of draw stuff out of them. So kind of like, you know, not quite comparing, kind of character-based role play stuff with someone from the audience, and that was me picking up some threads that I used or learned in university, and that must have been improv that I was taught at university, but they just called it drama because it's kind of like that was, I think, my earliest kind of exposure to kind of like, we can role play it and then make it up, and that was kind of like, it was role play but it was improv. And I do like improv, and it's kind of like my affection for improv has grown over time. I'm kind of early doors with it's kind of like, yeah, but it's not stand-up, because that was when I was going through my dick phase of stand-up. But it's kind of like, once I'd got over that, it's kind of like, all right, this is two halves of my brain, and they really feed off each other quite well.
Because it's a discipline as well, improv.
Oh yeah,
There are
it's not just making stuff up. It is not just making stuff up.
So what's the sort of the engine works behind it? Would you say?
Improvisation is a technique using of listening and responding, where you are in the moment in order to listen to the end of someone's sentence before you respond. It's very active listening in order to then. It's brain work. It's like a muscle that
because you have to keep accepting, isn't it?
Accept and build, accept and build, and improv in the recent years has been really valuable to me in terms of kind of development. Just as accept and build totally is a thing.
And so the Comedy Sportz sort of the group.
Yes.
So normally improv's sort of a group of performers taking suggestions off the audience, but this is where it's like a team competition. It's
I think the best. I mean, I'm going to use the Whose Line Is It Anyway analogy, because I think that's the one that people know the most. But if you imagine Whose Line Is Anyway, where you've got like 4 people up doing a sketch or a game. But instead of just having one group of people, you have 2.
Right.
And one goes up and does a game, and then the other one goes up and does a game, and then we'll call that a round, and then the audience score it.
Right.
And then it's a point-based thing.
Okay.
So it's kind of like, and it's done using sporting terms and sporting terminologies, and one of the teams is the red team, the other one's the blue, and we wear like sports-type shirts. And the person who kind of like, your narrator, your host of the show, wears a referee top. So it's very much played out as a sport, but it isn't about sports at all.
Right,
it's just about it's a comedy,
and
all the kind of and it's really fun. I mean, more recently, one of the guys in the groups had a kid, and he said, "Oh, we should do a show for under 6s." And it's kind of like, yeah, right. But it's actually tremendously good fun to do a show for under 6s, because it's all clean anyway.
Yeah.
The Comedy Sportz is one of its raison d'etre is that it's family friendly.
How do you alter the material or your style to say doing a family show or adult audiences to under 6s?
I mean, I've never had a problem language wise, because my stand-up's always been relatively clean, and Danny Pensive is clean, so doing improv clean is fine. And literally all you're doing when you're switching family improv comedy to kids specific is the noise and the colour goes up.
Right.
And there's a science term which is perfect for it, which is the world does not need big ideas, it needs lots of tiny experiments.
Right.
And when you're doing a kids show, it's kind of like, don't come on with a big idea. It's like, if it was story time, if it was storyteller's thing, that's fine, you can tell the story. But for improv, when you're putting energy into the room, as opposed to asking for theatrical quiet, which Comedy Sportz is not theatrical quiet, you're wanting to build the energy and the kind of momentum in the room. It is just about having lots of ideas, lots of games and lots of thoughts, and just pull them out quickly and then throw them away, just so that you're retaining the attention span of the kids. And it's kind of like over time I've accumulated, and all the guys I work with have all accumulated like all these little things to do. I mean, it's like I've been doing yoga for a few years, so I can stand on my head. Right. So it's kind of like, even before the show started, I'll be like falling over and then stand on my head and then fall over again. And it's kind of like the kids will just be like, "What's going on?" It's kind of like they're engaged and they're laughing, but they're just like, "What's going on?" And it's kind of like, sometimes it's good if I don't know what's going on. Right, it's kind of like, because you are literally improving with your mates and making stuff up, like hiding behind things, or just kind of like pretending your hand's falling off. Right. Where's my hand? Oh, where's my hand? It's on the end of your wrist. No, and just kind of like literally tiny, not cheap laughs, but just a quick succession of silliness. Yes. And I love that.
I think children pick up on adults being silly.
Yeah. And it's kind of like, and even the adults are kind of like, if you have a sense of momentum and a pocket full of ammunition, you can wear the adults down as well. And eventually, they'll, what's this?
And one of the pets, so the parents are a bit sort of to start with, are a little bit. I won't be laughing at this.
Not so much that. Just for some of it, it's kind of like, well, we've not seen it, so we don't understand it. So it's going to probably take us a little bit to get it. And then when they get it, usually it's like with that comedy sports format. It's you can only really explain it by watching it. And when you're watching it, that's how we get the fans. They watch it, they get it, and then they love it, you know. But it's kind of like they have to go through that process.
Yeah.
Either that or it isn't for them. So it's kind of like, oh, well, this isn't for me.
Yeah.
You know, I remember in the early days of doing stuff for Comedy Sportz, there was quite a lot of resistance from the stand-up scene.
Yeah.
Just because it was family friendly and it was improv and it was colourful and it was silly. Yeah. And it's kind of like that's not stand-up. You know, it's kind of because it isn't. Well, it isn't. You're right. It's not stand-up, but it doesn't mean it's better or worse. It's just different.
Yeah.
You know, and it's kind of like I think it took a long time for everyone who was involved in sports, you know, management and players alike, to kind of get afforded the respect of kind of like, well, we're still here actually. We're doing a bloody good job. Thank you very much.
It's been really successful, and they've taken it up to Edinburgh.
Yeah.
And I heard a story that they did actually perform to royalty, which you weren't in the group at that or you weren't performing that day, but apparently they'd seen it in the brochure.
They'd seen it in the brochure. They saw it, and who was it? It was Prince. Was it Edward?
Was it Edward and Sophie?
Edward and Sophie
with their kids.
With their kids, yeah.
And apparently there was all this. I think this. They
had like 6 doormen come in or something like that. Like just like these 6 kind of G-men just come in, just check the case the place over, and then like let them in. That was a good story.
That's a great, I suppose, testament to the group, and it keeps going from strength to strength. And you also do your own workshops as well.
Yes, when I'm not doing Danny Pensive. I mean, as I say, I do Danny. I'm still doing Danny quite actively, and if I'm not doing Danny, I'm doing myself.
Yeah.
Comparing as me, just John Cooper, which is nice to be myself.
Is that nice to come out of the sports, come out of the character, and just be back to how you started all those years ago?
I mean, the dilemma I did the kids show at the Comedy Store a couple of weeks ago that I mentioned, and they didn't bill me as Danny Pensive, and I'd heard rumour that the Comedy Store don't like character acts.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, okay, and I thought, should I address it? No, I'm not going to address it, because am I going to be Danny when I go there? Well, I probably will be Danny. Should I tell them I'm Danny? It's kind of like, and literally it's kind of like, I went in this cyclical argument with myself, and in the end it's kind of like, well, who's the only person who's remotely stressed out about it is me, and I'm just caught in my own head. So it's kind of like, just don't worry about it. You know, it's like it is like literally more me worried about my own identity and how I'm presenting myself as the actual thing that's happening in the room at the time with the kids. So it's kind of like, didn't really matter. It was actually quite nice to be me, even though in the back of my head I was speaking with Danny Pensive's voice.
What's a typical Danny line then? Just to give us an indication of his thoughts or feelings. I'm putting you on the spot now.
No, you are, and I'm going to throw out one that some people will just go Instead, I'm just not going to do a banker. I'm just going to do. If you got all the people in this room and laid them all out end to end, some of them would get run over, and you know that sometimes I've done gigs where it works, and I've done gigs where there's a big penny drop. You know, it's kind of like a penny where it's kind of like, what did you say? You know, and it's kind of like there's a gap.
I did something on hula hoops once. I saw it, which was brilliant, and the crowd absolutely.
Oh God, what was a hula hoops?
You were eating, or you were talking to a bag of hula hoops or something like that.
Does anybody want a hula hoop? That's right. I had a bag of hula hoops. I used to give hula hoops out. That man, God, you've given us a flashback. That was one of the first things I did. Does anybody want a hula hoop? And I would just stand there and hold the bag out, and someone would go yes, but then I'd not move. I'd just stand there, and it's kind of like, are you coming to me or I'm coming to you? Well, I'm probably not going to come to you. So if you want a hula hoop, and it was like a status thing of you're going to have to get up out of your chair and come and get a hula hoop out of the packet. And if it was someone at the back of the room, it's kind of like, okay. And I would leave this long pause of just kind of like, well, are you going to get one or not? And it's kind of like, look at the bag and look at the person and look at the bag and look at the person. And it's just kind of like go through this kind of low status process of who's going to move, because it's not going to be me.
It's hard as well and I can't stand long pauses, and I've seen you will dig in and hold it, and How do you sort of just have the sort of balls to just keep the pause going?
You've got to have enough in your back pocket to pull them out of that. So you've got to have some laughs ready. But it's like, I do like a pause. I like an awkward pause and like I call it penny dropping, as in the time it takes for a gag to land if it's a particularly challenging gag. I even say now, halfway through the set, I've got some horizontal jokes and I've got some vertical jokes. The horizontal jokes, they're dead easy to get. The vertical jokes, you might not get them today.
Yeah.
Or ever. And it's kind of, and that's a big ask. That's a big ask of an audience. But usually that gets a laugh now because I can put it in the right place of a gig. I know the room well enough to know when to roll that out as a thing.
That's brilliant.
But,
and sorry, I interrupted the workshops you do as well.
Yeah,
so I didn't know you did. So tell us about.
I was doing like, I taught stand up for years and years and years, and in the early doors of teaching it, a lot of people would come to it wanting to be stand up. They'd go through Comedy Sportz, and then literally towards the end of doing that, fewer people wanted to be stand ups, and there were people coming who wanted to get better at just getting up in front of people and talking. It was a confidence thing, and at that time I was kind of reading up on. I quite like brain food, so I was reading up on a little bit of NLP and this sort of personal development stuff and podcasts and applied improvisation and stuff like that. And it's kind of like, what if I kind of retool my thoughts as a way of... I watched a TED talk that was by a person called Karen Greenfield about... Dr. Karen Greenfield, I think was her name, about how mobile phones and screen culture are eroding social skills for like millennials, and like text messaging and that use of language, and how it's kind of like kids would much rather do that than engage directly with people, and then watch footage of is public speaking one of the most terrifying things? People seem to think it is, and people giving big talks. People giving TED Talks, brilliant, front and centre, but it's kind of like also when you give someone a lectern and a big screen, it's kind of they'll hide behind the lectern and point at the screen like, don't look at me. So I just thought, okay, how about doing a mashup where it's like stand-up comedy skills for people who want to give presentations.
And TED Talks, that's a massive website. That's like educational talks. Is that what it stands for?
I'm not sure what TED stands for, but I'm a big fan of those. I love TED Talks. I love brain food and that kind of thing. That really inspires me because I'm naturally curious about a lot of this obscure stuff.
And this got you into these courses of helping people become more confident.
Helping people just get up in front, and people who are kind of like who lack confidence, who want to do it, or anyone who's kind of like used to doing it but maybe wants to apply a bit of stand-up comedy. Because one thing that I kind of like is the psychology of how a stand-up comedy room works. It's kind of, I think, all the while I've been doing stand-up, I've been fascinated about the relationship between the comedian and the audience. Not just kind of like, not just the craft of writing jokes, because that's a weak spot I've got, but the actual psychology between how the room works, and the kind of audiences you get, and how you deal with that, and how you play status. Because Danny's low status, and I've always played low status. I can go high status.
But it's a status is kind of an acting term for status, like 9, 10. I think you're on a 1 to 10 scale. And it's very high status would be very loud, very sort of over the top.
You don't necessarily have to be loud to be high status. If it was a boss and an employee, the boss would be high status and the employee would be low status.
Okay, this is an improv thing as well, isn't it?
It's just kind of a social thing.
Okay.
It's kind of like usually people have high status who have wealth, like celebrities have high status, but then there's things like, I'm a big fan of Dragon's Den, and I love watching the interplay between the people doing the pitches and the dragons, and it's how it's kind of like, there's a playfulness, but there's who's controlling the playfulness. It's kind of like, how much are they open? How much are you sharing emotionally, as opposed to just kind of like being businessy and salesy. And all that stuff I got really into, the psychology of. And what was the book I read? To Sell as Human by Dan Pink, about how we sell ourselves on Facebook in the everyday world. So I basically just put all this stuff together and put it into this kind of curriculum for people to get up on stage or up in front of a group of people and observe and play with. There's even a game where it's kind of like I ask people to just come up and stand next to me at the beginning of a session if they're scared of public speaking, and they don't have to say anything. It's just kind of like all you're doing is standing there and just looking at the audience and feeling what it's like to have the audience staring. And it's kind of like, because that's unusual, that's not a natural position to be in. It's kind of like, it's the fight or flee mentality that we had from way back, where it's kind of like you're not feeling eyes on you is quite, you want to cross your arms, or you want to stand behind a lectern, or you want to not put yourself in, you're exposed, you know.
And this is a big fear for other people.
So it's dealing with that, and then it's kind of dealing with it in a fun way and not a scary way. But I'm trying. I've kind of slowly begun to pitch it as a kind of extreme sport, but you don't have to climb a mountain or get in a plane, you know. But it's, the idea is that it is pushing people's comfort zones and kind of making them kind of, you know, giving them a bit of an adrenaline hit.
And do you give them sort of like exercises? Are they, and is it, when you do it in the room with them, do you have a mic stand there, or
there might be a mic stand, or there might not be a mic stand, depending on the nature of what they want. But it is literally about throwing people up in front of a group, not letting them prepare, and just watching them kind of like a mother duck throwing a duckling into the or a baby bird being pushed out of the tree. It's kind of like, you're not going to die. No one's going to shoot you. You're not going to, you know. It's what it is. It's a fun. It's how to build up a bit of resilience, but in a fun way. And it's, you know, and it's kind of like, there's a little bit of me that's kind of like, I feel a little bit cheeky when I'm doing it. But and everyone I've done it so far, it's kind of, I've had to feel my way around it. But
I suppose when you started, you went through that barrier.
You do. I think it totally relates back to how you start when you're doing stand-up comedy. It's kind of like, you know, who the fuck are you to get up in front of these people and think that they should listen to what it is you've got to say? You know, and it's kind of like, you're only going to get good at it if you get up and do it. Do it. And then when it goes wrong, you have to get up again.
Yes.
You can't not get up again. You can't, if you kind of go, oh well, that's failure. It's kind of like, no. It's not.
And equally, if you have a good one, and I did this once, I stopped for 3 months because I thought, oh well, I've obviously cracked it. And then you even when you have that, I think Harry Hill said, if you have a terrible 5 minutes, or you put yourself for 5 minutes or whatever, if you have a good 5 minutes, get off. If you have a terrible 5 minutes, get off.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what he said, something like that.
So,
but there's a couple of things that I've picked up that I use now, and I'll leave with this. It's there is no failure, only learning, and that's NLP, and that can apply to stand-up comedy. And the other one, which is a motto that I live by now, which is the map is not the territory.
Right.
Which is the idea that you can have a map. So you can have your bullet points of your set list that you're going to go out on the stage and do. You can prepare for the gig as long as you want, and you can have all your gags written down in your head, but that's a map. That's not the actual territory.
Right. Okay.
That's not in the room with the audience on the night. You can't gauge everything. You can't allow for everything. All you can do is cover. You can build as detailed a map as you want of knowing exactly what you're going to say and when you're going to say it. But that's going to go. The second you go on the stage and you open your mouth, only half of that's ever going to
come with you.
You know.
Right. That's a good. I like that one.
I love it. It's kind of like, this is not. It's an old military term apparently. Because kind of like, you know, this is the operation. This is the map. This is the topography. This is where we've got to get to. But it's kind of like this. You can't plan for everything, so don't.
And it can be war sometimes. I think we've all been there. So as the band strikes up below, we're in the Castle Hotel pub in Manchester, and very popular with lots of bands. Anyway, one last question that comes of Funny Peculiar podcast that I ask everybody is, who should I have on the show? Who would you recommend I track down for a future episode? I
am going to recommend someone who is half my age and has gone on stage in character as a called Welly Head. He doesn't perform in character. He's called Lucas Kirkby.
Right. Okay.
He's a fellow improviser and stand-up comedian. and he's quite a prolific YouTuber as well.
Okay, but he's known as Wellyhead.
He did a character briefly called Wellyhead, which I thought was hilarious. But Lucas Kirkby would be my recommendation. Brilliant. If you can track him down.
I will try and track him down. John Cooper, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
Cheers, mate.
You've been listening to Funny Peculiar. Tune in next week. More great guests.
A big thank you to John for coming on the show there. We found everything out we needed to know about character comedy, about improv, about visiting royal families in Edinburgh. So thank you again to John, and do make sure you follow him on Twitter and Instagram, which is JohnCooper_UK, and you can find him on Facebook. Do leave comments on the show, leave me your feedback, let me know what you think of Funny Peculiar, and keep listening. Thank you for your support, and next week I'm sure another great guest. Thank you very much.